my sinuses went haywire this afternoon. So,
Oh, they did?
oh, I think I should get to it.
Isn't it crazy how you can live in, I mean, how they, when they go off, they just go,
Oh, man, I got up from a nap and I couldn't breathe. And my sinuses just jumping shut.
something's in the air out there. Though.
Got some here?
No, he's out there.
Yeah, thanks. She's gonna watch too. Oh my goodness. Praise him, friend.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you do in our lives that we cannot do for ourselves. We thank you for bringing us all together. We ask that you just go before us and lay this out for us. And, let it be you that we seek. And let your words fall on us in our hearts and lips. We thank you for all that you've done today and that you will continue to do in our lives. Just wow today. Show us something cool. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Something cool. Show us something cool. Righty. Well, welcome all you online people. The big audience of Bucky. If Bucky watches this anyway, are here with Michael and Jimmy and Mike. So we are still in our study on Deborah, and it's in our text is from the book of Judges, chapters 4 and 5, which we are really just kind of in chapter 4. And I don't think we're going to get to 5, right? If we do, it'll be just kind of winging it because I haven't really studied 5 yet much. But somebody want to catch us up? Kind of what the scenario is for chapter 4 that we got started last week. What's the scenario of what is happening with Israel? Have they been good boys or bad boys?
Bad boys.
They've been bad boys, bad boys.
They've been bad boys.
What you gonna do?
Bad boys. They have not had. They lack leadership.
Yeah. Exactly.
They lack leadership, but you have this woman who has stepped up,
Yes,
to the plate. And I really didn't know anything about this story until I started this. You know, I really didn't.
yeah,
And not only did she step up, but she stepped up at a time when it wasn't common for women to have that kind of power.
exactly.
So, so here she goes, though.
Yeah, yeah. What was the scenario as far as what kind of conflict, or who was Israel having a conflict with at this particular juncture? So if we look at our Bibles in chapter 4 and look at the second verse of chapter 4, it kind of tells us King of Canaan. Right. What was Canaan?
Canaan was the territory that we see on the map, wasn't it?
Yeah. And where is Canaan located in the world?
Just Gaza Strip.
Yeah, the Gaza Strip would be part of it. But much bigger part of it is the modern state today of what?
Hazor.
No,
No.
the modern state.
Oh, I don't know.
They got what do you got going on in the world right now? The fight is between Gaza and who in the world right now? Gaza,
Oh, Gaza and oh, you want to say something I had it? I can tell you.
Israel.
Israel.
So the Canaan was the name of the territories. It was the name of the territories before it became Israel. Okay. And so you had a king up in Hazel, which is kind of up in the northern part of the territory in Israel. And then he had a commander by the name of who?
Ransom.
Who? It's right there in verse 2 as well.
Jabin.
Hazor.
Jabin was the king
Yeah,
of
Jabin,
Canaan.
king of
Who was
Canaan.
his right hand guy? Who was his
Remember
commander?
Syria?
Sisera.
Yeah,
Sisera.
Sisera.
Yeah. And did they live in the same town?
No.
No, they didn't. They lived some miles apart. But Sisera was his right hand guy. And at this time in history, because the children of Israel had been doing evil in the sight of the Lord, then, as always, it seems like in the cycles of Israel, they do evil and then they start getting oppressed. Why? Why? Why is Israel getting oppressed by the Canaanites once they start doing evil?
Because God allowed it.
Yes.
God actually, how was that worded?
Stick 'em on.
Almost handed them
And yeah.
Handed them over, right?
handed them over to them.
And why did he hand them over to the Canaanites? I mean, was there who? I'll put this easy for you. Who foretold? Who prophesied that that would happen to them?
Ehud?
No.
No.
Who was the leader of the Israelites coming out of Egypt?
Moses.
Moses.
Yeah, Moses.
I remember we went back and we looked, and Moses, I think it's in Deuteronomy 32, in his song, he's saying, look, God's been trying to prepare you guys this whole time in the wilderness, that once you go into the promised land, you got a different set of laws to live by than the Canaanites and everybody else that's there, or a different set of laws than what the Egyptians lived by. And so he said, however, you're going to have a covenant with this God, Yahweh, but that covenant means if you don't keep your end of the deal, what's going to happen?
Get you.
Who's going to get you?
The Lord's
The Lord's going to get you. Like Michael said, he's going to hand you over.
Sold it into the hand.
Yeah. Hand you over to your enemies. And this seems to be God's prescription for trying to get Israel to do what?
To follow him.
Right. Because once that they get handed over, then they're being oppressed for, in this case, for 20 years, I think it says. They've been oppressed for 20 years. Then in verse 3, they start saying, well, they start doing it in verse 3. Yeah. The children cried unto the Lord. Sisera had 900 chariots of iron, and we talked about that. And for 20 years, he had mightily oppressed the children of Israel. But it's because the Lord handed them over.
Mm-hmm.
What gave the Lord the authority to hand Israel over? I mean,
because they were doing evil.
Yeah, but besides the fact that he's God and he can do what he wants to do, what sort of authority did he have to hand them over? God himself.
Because he's God.
He's God.
He has all authority.
And he told them from the get-go,
Yeah.
right?
You gotta follow, don't follow false idols, and don't,
Exactly.
you don't do this and don't do that. These
So,
are these are the rules of the stipulation.
Yeah,
And
of the covenant.
it was inscribed on tablets and everything.
It was inscribed and by his own
by
hand.
his own
Finger, yeah.
So
it's not like they were ignorant. They didn't do this out of ignorance, right? They, and we remember we talked a little bit about the concept of backsliding, and that we're all familiar with that concept, that you know what's right to do, but then here's a little, and there's a little, and there's a little, and the next thing you know, you're a long ways away from where you should have been, right?
Mhm.
It's like, and we likened it to, and I think Jimmy talked about this last week, is like likened it to the whole issue of recovery, the recovery process where you relapse.
Right. You go back to your old ways.
Yeah, and he gave us examples of in the ministry where he works in of guys that just make a decision.
Yeah, it's that simple. It's, you know what's right.
Yeah.
You know there's a choice out there. You choose to pick it up and put it in your body.
Yeah.
That's your choice. All we can do is give you the tools and tips of the trade. What worked for me through my testimony is the only thing I can really truly hand you. And the tools and testimonies of other people that successfully have walked through this.
Yeah.
And then that gives you your place to go fill in the blanks. You know what I mean? But in the all in game, it's all free will.
yeah, it's free will.
You know what I mean? So you have a choice. You're still choosing to do the right thing.
So I think you were, I don't know whether it was in our meeting or whether we were talking Sunday, you were talking about this guy that you were like mentoring recently.
Jack.
His name's Jack.
Mhm.
Okay. So just basically describe what happened to him fairly recently.
He just decided that he wanted to go do some more drugs and go back out there and get it.
How long had he been in the program?
He's been in the program probably 6 months, probably.
Okay.
But he got phased back because he left one time before.
Okay.
So they started him over.
Okay.
And then now this is his twice the time he's been back out again. And then I seen him out there with the sign, just like he talked, like he was going to. It's almost like he knew he was prophesying what he was going to do. He already had a plan. You know what I mean?
And you saw
Generally,
that
relapse you're usually relapsing before you actually put it in you. You've already got an idea of what you're going to do. It's already ingrained in there, and you know what I mean. It's a plan. You know, we plan out. We're experts at lying and tricking ourselves into and tricking you into believing one thing, but we're actually skating by so we can go do or have our little freedom to do the fleshy thing, what we want to do. Yeah, and so that's where it lies. Is that it's just a choice. And no matter what I do or what I say, all I can do is point you toward Jesus and let Jesus do the heavy lifting, right, and try to change you. Because I am not trying to change you. All I can do is steer you toward Jesus.
Yeah. And see, what is so perfect about this in the ministry that you work and the way that you've had to walk is such a parallel to what God was dealing with his own people. Is this whole series of relapses and recovery, relapse and recovery. And but it's like it's so evident throughout all of their history as we study the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. That's what we're seeing. It's the same picture that you see in individuals, in that community here today. So there's a saying in the Bible somewhere says there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Right. Right. And so I think it's just so interesting how, as we're talking about Israel's relapses, and then
we have something.
then they
that
get desperate.
Something that we can identify with.
Right. When they get desperate, okay, they get desperate and they start calling out to the Lord. So in the case of Jack and so many of the other guys, once that these guys relapse, what is something that typically happens once they relapse after a while?
After a while, well, when they get sick of being on the street, they'll come back.
So they come back to
the porch.
Let's talk about that just a minute.
Yeah.
What exactly happens? They come back.
They'll come back when we get back to the program.
Okay.
Seek our counsel again.
And then how do they get back in the program?
How do they get back in? By the choice of the leaders.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of stipulations do they put on them before they can actually?
They usually make them sit on the porch for a weekend.
Okay. Just for the purpose of what?
Just to prove, I mean, just to this is like your punishment, just to see if you're going to stay.
Okay.
Just to see if you are willing and you're going to stay. You just stay all weekend on the porch. We'll feed you. We'll let you go to the bathroom. We'll feed you and water you and give you everything you need, blanket, pillow, whatever. But you gotta stay there.
They want some
sort
of a commitment.
That's right.
Do they make you commit? I mean, do they make you commit verbally?
No, you just gotta be there. Just stay there. Don't leave. Don't leave. There's a ring camera up there.
So if you leave,
yeah, they ain't gonna let you back in. It just starts time over.
So yeah.
So it's really interesting to me how that parallels with kind of what God's doing. There is a process of coming back, but it requires repentance.
Yes.
And in their case, the fruit of the repentance is, okay, you got to stay out on the porch for a couple of days or whatever, and that's the fruit saying, okay, yes, I am making a commitment.
Actually, I think it's automatic covering. You know what I mean? They're back under the covering.
Okay.
To me, that's what it feels like, that we're doing for them, that they're in a safe place. They're okay to do what you did. We're not judging you, but this is what you have to do for us to cover you.
Yeah.
Again. You know what I mean?
It's very much like that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing too, when you think about it, Jimmy, when you finally, whoever makes the decision to finally let them back in the house, to me, there's some sort of a protective covering, not just for that guy out on the porch, but it's also a protective covering for the guys that are inside already, because there's also the scripture says a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Do you know what Jesus meant by that? Do you know what leaven is?
No. Bacteria?
Like bread?
Yeah, like bread. Because if you don't have any leaven in the bread will rise. Typically you put the leaven in, the bread rises, then you put them in the oven and cook it, and you get this bread, the yeast, like the yeast and stuff. But if when he says a little leaven leavens the whole lump, that means that, okay, if you take that yeast and you put it in the whole thing, it's going to affect the whole thing. It's kind of like putting one apple that's got a bad spot on it in with a bunch of other apples.
Yeah.
Before long, they're all bad.
Yep.
That kind of thing. So it's kind of protection also for those that are already in the inside. They're struggling enough the way they are without having this fresh guy just off the streets coming in, and if he's not truly repentant, that he could bring in this strange stuff from the outside again. They've been trying to keep out.
We got to monitor things like what they have on their person.
Yeah.
They can bring drugs to themselves. They can bring knives into it. We had guys that come in there and was making shanks in it. The facility. We got a whole backpack full handmade shanks. I had knives I found up in the vents.
Oh man.
And things like that. And these are the things that we have to do to protect them, because if one guy goes in there and freaks out, it go what killing spree and kill. I mean, these are just things that we have to protect the ministry and look out for. You know, especially my guys that come in my job, they've been in my truck. I need to get into your pockets every day. This is the deal. And I've caught them and I make them pay, make them push hot 50 right now. God, yeah.
50 push-ups.
Yeah, because they handed me a knife. It's like, we don't do that. We don't bring it in the house. You know, I've already been through this with you. Into your pocket.
So you've been through that with them.
Yeah, yeah. And then I saw we're gonna drop right then. They don't like handing it over to me because they know I'm gonna make a push as soon as they.
Why do you think they
Slips their mind. They don't think about it. Even when I ask them straight up, point blank, asking somebody, they just get a brain fog. They're not focused.
think they get so? I mean, you get so used to, you know.
It's like you get a little privilege and you push it. You know, and then you notice it's I don't know, I guess it's a third phase blue or whatever. You think you get this back, you get a little freedom,
You get a phone back.
you get a phone, you get a little check. Then all of a sudden you go, then the eyes come. Now I can do this and can't do that. I said, no, you stay out of eye. You're in a program. You do as you're instructed to do. Because even though we have a SOP of rules and regulations, there's a big one at the end there that says any rule can be changed at any time by staff on duty. So once you sign that contract, you are in it because that's the thing is we're a growing ministry. We're in a growth phase. So everything's subject to change.
Yeah.
And it's okay to be open minded and willing. And we want you to read the book and press upon it and hold us accountable as well to what we have you sign the contract. But it's a two-way street. Yeah. You know, and they want that to be something.
That's good. Well, we see a lot of parallels between uh, the real life that we're living today, uh, as Jimmy was explaining about the ministry and what was happening with Israel. So, and Michael had started talking about Deborah. What was different about Deborah beside the fact, as a judge, that was different because there were no other female judges. But what was even more different that set her apart from all the other judges except Samuel? You remember?
The people came up to her.
Yeah, well, the people came up, all these other guys too.
Oh, did it?
Sure. What was different about her?
Oh, she sat under a palm tree.
And why did she sit under the palm tree?
She was a prophet.
There you go.
Prophetic.
She was the prophet. She was a prophet.
Prophetess.
And the only other prophet that was a judge was the man Samuel. And Samuel is the one who anointed the first two kings of Israel. He anointed King Saul. And then when King Saul fell out of favor with the Lord because he was disobedient, then Samuel anointed David, King David. So she was a prophet. And the people were coming to her for judgment and all that. And somewhere in the process, as we get down toward, she operated in the hill country of Ephraim, which is kind of the central part of Israel's inheritance. And, some of the trouble was up in the northern part of Israel, if you remember from our map. And so it says that in verse 6 that she sent and called for some guy. Who did she call for?
Barak.
Yeah. She called for Barak, and he was a tribe of, he came out of Kadesh what? Naphtali, right. So he was of the tribe of Naphtali, okay, which was one of the northern tribes. Okay. And she called him to come for an accounting. In other words, she's down here in the middle of the country. He's up here in the north. Somehow she got word to him, say, "Hey, Bubba, I need you to come down here and have a discussion with me." She called him. In other words, she summoned him. Well, think about that a minute. Once again, we were talking about the dynamic of the culture where you have a female judge, which was just out of, it was totally different than what Israel had ever seen before. So here's this woman calling this warrior down to get in front of her to answer questions. So what was she saying to him when he came down? She had basically a question for him. And what did she say to him?
Go and gather your men to the mount.
But before she said that,
this is what the Lord.
Oh yeah, but the Lord
of Israel commands.
Yeah.
Okay, but in verse 6, are you looking at verse 6? What is how does read verse 6, Mike?
One day she sent for Barak, son of
Abinoam, I think.
Abinoam, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you."
Okay. So there's different translations. In my translation, and sometimes the translations make a difference on what impression. So in your translation, it says exactly, as if she's just delivering the word of the Lord to him right then and there. This is what the Lord is saying. In my translation, it says, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded, saying?" And that makes it almost sound like, look, did God already tell you? Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded? And so, that caused me to think, okay, well, how would he have known? And it caused me to wonder, because we don't know exactly because of these scriptures, just the way that they are. But it almost makes you wonder that she had maybe sent a word to him already saying, "The Lord's commanded you to gather the troops." And he hadn't done it.
He hadn't done it yet.
And so then she was calling him on the carpet saying, "Look, hadn't the Lord commanded you?" All right. Now, we don't know if it's like that or not, but by the different translations, as you're thinking about these things, you're going, I wonder if that's the way it is, and not that it makes a huge difference, I think, in the storyline of what God's going to do and what he's done, but still, it can give us pause to say, well, in our lives, have we received a word from somebody or an instruction from somebody or something and we just kind of blew it off?
Absolutely.
And then later on, they realize that you blew it off and they call you on the carpet and say, hey buddy, didn't I tell you to do this? And it in my translation, it almost sounds like God saying, "Look, I told you once, you didn't do it. Now she's calling you back and calling you on the carpet." And then she goes on and says, and tells him, "Okay, now go and draw toward Mount Tabor. Take with you 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and the children of Zebulun." Okay. And we looked on a map last week and we saw that Naphtali and Zebulun were neighboring Israelite tribes. And actually, remember, we had King Jabin over the Canaanites, and then you had Sisera, which is his commander. Well, King Jabin actually lived in Naphtali's region, and Sisera lived in Zebulun's region. So it makes sense hey, Barack, you need to pull up the men from those two
Yes.
tribes. At a minimum, you need to pull them up to deal with this problem up there in the northern part of the territory. And she goes on and she's prophesying in verse 7, and she's saying, I will draw. Now, who is the I in that?
Her.
The eye is God.
Exactly. The
I
I is
believe
God, because she's prophesying. Remember,
Yeah,
she's a prophet.
She's actually, yeah.
And verse 7 is saying, I will draw, which is the Lord, unto thee to the brook of Kishon Sisera, and the captain of Jabin's army with his chariots and his multitude. So now, how many chariots do you have?
900.
He had 900. And what kind of chariots were they? Iron chariots. So this is like having 900 tanks.
State of the art.
Yeah, state of the art. Okay. And the Lord goes on through her and says, I will deliver him into thy hand. Back in those days, whether you were going to Yahweh for guidance as your God and so forth, you had all these different Canaanite tribes, you had the Egyptian tribes, you had all of these different ones. They were all reliant on their gods. They had personal gods that they wanted to have their gods favor before they ever went into battle.
Yeah.
And so that's where their priests for that god got involved, and they'd usually go to those priests and say, look, go before our God and see if you could acquire this blessing to give us a victory
Right.
out there, and that's what they were looking for. And so in that regard, Israel, that was part of the culture back then. Israel was no different in terms of that process.
Yeah, the Greek did something like that too.
Yeah, the Greeks looked for their gods to give them blessings so that they would succeed and all this. But Israel had one unique God that was different from all the other gods. And uniquely, their God, Yahweh, his name was Yahweh, was the God of gods.
Yeah.
He was the creator.
Because he was.
He was God.
So these other guys were just like this guy.
Yeah.
They were other deities, right? And we may learn more about gods with a little g, okay? Gods with a little g, but the God who is creator of all things. And we've got support for this in other books of the Bible, like the book of Job. If you ever read Job, Job for me has always been such a confusing book to some degree. But you got this recognition that Yahweh, our God, is the one who has created Genesis. He's the one that created everything from the very beginning.
Mhm.
Okay, so verse 7. So I will draw unto you Sisera with his army, and the Lord is making a declaration, I will deliver him into thy hand. Well, we talked a few weeks back about the civil war between Benjamin and the Confederation of Israelites. And we noted that 2 times they went into battle, and little Benjamin beat up on all the Israeli, all the Israelite tribes that were combined forces that were like 16 times more, 16 times bigger than Benjamin. But then the third time, when they went to the Lord and they worshiped and so forth, and then the Lord said, okay, this time I'm going to give you Israelites. And you talked about that last week when we were leaving. I'm going to give you guys the victory. Okay. So here, straight out of the straight out of the hopper, God is saying through Deborah, look, I want you to go up against these Canaanites, and the Lord is saying, I want to put him into your hand. Well, earlier in the chapter, who was in whose hand? Do you remember that terminology?
It was in the king's hand.
Okay, who was in the king's hand?
Israelites.
The Israelites, yeah. We saw in verse 2, the Lord gave Israelites over to the hand of Jabin, which means he had control of them. And what the Lord's saying through Deborah says, okay, I'm going to flip the script on this one. And I'm going to put Jabin in your hands. Okay. So he's doing just the opposite of what had been going on. So this is where we get into to Barak. Let me back up a little bit and look at my notes here to see if we've missed anything. Okay. Let me do back up a little bit, verses 4 to 10. But Michael had mentioned a little bit earlier that I think it was Michael, or maybe Jimmy, how Deborah sat under a palm tree.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal with sitting under the palm tree?
It's shade.
Huh?
It's in the shade.
It's what?
It's in the shade.
Oh, it's in the shade.
That's very well.
I'm sorry. That's supposed to be said in the shade. Okay, well, maybe you're right.
What's the deal with sitting under the palm tree?
So look at page number 4 on your
You
notes.
see the area.
Look at page number 4. I put a little commentary in there. Page 4.
Page
Says,
4.
says verses 4 through 10 up towards the top of the page, right?
Yes.
And we were talking about, I was asking, well, what's the role of prophetess? We kind of skipped over that. So what was interesting to me, not only was she a prophetess, she was a wife. Okay. It says clearly she was a wife. We don't know how old she was, but Sandra Richter seemed to think, she was probably, more of a middle-aged wife, or maybe in her 40s or something like that, or whatever, probably had a family and so forth. But I asked in letter B of number 1, why would the author mention that her judgment seat was located under a palm? And Jimmy says, simply because there's shade there. Okay, that might be a defining reason. But there might be something a little deeper too.
Yeah.
And one of the things I looked up about that, it talked about the palm tree. And I put a little note here, the date palm is the characteristic palm tree in Palestine. It is described as a flourishing, tall, upright. Its branches are a symbol of victory. Okay, so as in Hebrew, the way that Hebrews looked at things, and a lot of the ancient people looked at things, there was a lot of symbolism attached to all these things. Okay, like your name's Michael, right? Michael. What's the EL part of Michael? What's it refer to? Where did Michael come from? Of course, you have Michael the Archangel. Okay. Do you know what the word Michael means?
I don't think I do.
You got any idea?
Mm.
Okay. The word Michael, the name Michael, means who is like God. But it's not a statement. It's a question. So Michael the Archangel, every time he was mentioned as Michael, his name was saying, who is like God? There's the implication is there is none. like God?
Oh.
Who is like God?
Who is like God?
And so it's glorifying the one, because El on Michael, El is a word for God in the Old Testament. El. You ever heard? Well, you may have heard the song El Shaddai. El Shaddai. El Shaddai.
El Shaddai.
Okay. El is a reference to God. Okay. And so Michael, every time it's being mentioned, his name is mentioned, it's saying, who's like God? It's asking the question of people, and it's causing them to check their hearts and saying, you know what? There's none like him. Isn't that powerful?
Mhm.
And that's right. That's your name. That's your birth name that you were given. So the whole thing about symbolism, you got the symbolism that is in all these things, and the palm tree was viewed as a symbol of victory. Okay, that she was sitting on the palm tree. Okay. Number two on that sheet, what accompanying spiritual gift seems to accompany a prophetess or a prophet?
That's always in tune with the Lord.
Okay, you're tuned with the Lord. But what is what do you find sometimes that is, okay, let's think about
Spiritual gift.
what spiritual gift. I mean, there's probably several, but there's a really pronounced spiritual gift that many times comes with a prophet.
Gift of song.
Very good. The gift of song. So we had read last week from Deuteronomy 32, and that's Moses giving all this. Did you know that whole thing is a song? You think of the prophet whose name was King David. He was referred to as a prophet. What is he known for in writings?
The songs.
The Psalms.
The songs.
The Psalms are just songs. It's an entire songbook that some of which he wrote and some of which he commissioned other people to write back in the day. Okay. You look at Deborah, and we haven't gotten to chapter 5 yet, but chapter 5, just taking a quick glance at it, we have a hint there. In the first verse of chapter 5, it says, Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Binuim, on that day, saying, and they start singing. Okay. So this is all of chapter 5 is considered the Song of Deborah. So the idea that what I hope that we can hold on to is the idea that song is tightly intertwined with poetry. You just think of your rap artists, for instance. A lot of their stuff is just poetry. Okay. Now, some of it's pretty crude, but as far as poetry goes, that's what it is. And it's got the rhythm, it's got the rhyming. A lot of times, it's got the different aspects of what you call poetry. Okay. And while it's much more narrative, usually telling a story or something like that, that's the way these guys' songs were, a lot of them. And so prophecy, songs, poetry tend to be, poetry and songs seem to be intertwined with the prophetic call, the prophetic gift. Okay. And that's in our natural society as well as in our spiritual heritage, especially the spiritual heritage.
It seems to be a lot. What I have stuck in my head is always popping, moving around because I always got a song in my head of something to do with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Constantly singing Jesus.
That's good.
In my mind.
That's so good. So the ancient type, the prophetess, a lot of times there's a spiritual gift that accompanies a prophetess. So in B, my question is, and this sounds like I'm just bringing something out of the clear blue. Does anybody know who Miriam was in the Old Testament?
Mm.
In the Exodus account. She also came out of Egypt as well. Who was Miriam? Jim's doing a search on his phone.
Whisper child, seed of bitterness and rebellion. The name Miriam of Hebrew origin has several meanings, including wish for a child, seed of bitterness and rebellion. In biblical name, most famously born by Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron,
There you go.
who played a key role in the Israelites' exodus from Egypt.
Okay, you can stop there. Miriam was Moses and Aaron's sister. You guys, do you remember reading the story about how at the time of Pharaoh, when Israel was in Egypt and they were slaves, and an edict came out from the king. What did the edict say that he wanted to do with every newborn baby boy?
Kill
it. Kill it, right? Well, what happened? Because Moses was born during that time. What happened?
Passover.
No. Well, you had Passover later on, but I'm talking when Moses was firstborn.
Didn't they?
How
Didn't they sneak him out?
How did Moses escape as a newborn infant boy?
Was it the river?
Yeah. What about the river? What happened was that his mama, I think her name was Jochebed, I think, she had faith that God would take care of him. So she built a little ark. This is strange. There's a basket. And she put him in there with this little Hebrew blanket. And she thought, it's going to be better if a crocodile eats him and kills him than him become a slave like what we did. And she put him out in the river. Then what happened? What happened to that little ark?
It went to the Pharaoh's, and one of the priestesses found it.
Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah.
And she found it. Well, his sister, this older sister of Moses, who wasn't in danger of being killed at that time because it was just killing newborn baby boys.
She was known for her courage in saving Moses as a baby.
Right.
Her leadership in leading the women in song after the.
Okay, we'll get there in just a minute. Okay. But as a little girl, she followed basket down the river. And when it got to Pharaoh's daughter, who's bathing at the edge of the river, and they picked up the baby and all that, Miriam came out from the bulrushes, I suppose. She went up to him and said, "Hey, I can find a Hebrew nurse. In other words, somebody who could breastfeed your baby." Because Pharaoh's daughter didn't have any kids. She didn't have any breast milk. But I can find a Hebrew woman. So she comes back and she gets who? She gets Moses' mother, her mother, to become Moses' nursing mother. So he nursed at his own mother's breast, but it was Miriam who set that up. Okay, as a little girl. Okay, so then the whole time that Moses is an infant and breastfeeding, and he may have back then they may have breastfed until they're like 2 or something, maybe older. I don't know, but he had his own mother helping him learn about what his identity truly was, which was to be a Hebrew, an Israelite. But he was being raised in Pharaoh's house. Okay. So you see, and then as you were just getting into, Miriam was known, once again, she was considered a prophetess herself when they came out of Egypt. Go ahead and read the part that you were reading.
The song. I lost it already. These proclaimed are often associated with sin and now decisions impacting the authority. Okay, a formal. I'm not.
Basically, when they came through the Red Sea and they came into safety, where, okay, so like, remember God parted the waters. Israelites came over through the Red Sea. Okay. They got on the other side. And once they got on the other side, then what happened to the Egyptians that were following them?
Drowned.
They're drowned. One. Moses took his staff away. The waters collapsed, crushed Pharaoh's entire army. Okay. And I don't know whether you've ever remembered this song, and maybe you've never heard it. It's called The Horse and the Rider. The Horse and the Rider into the sea. And it's talking, it's somewhat of a contemporary song. Go back in my day, it was contemporary. About the horse and the
Wild
rider.
horse.
Huh?
The man and the wild horse.
No.
Oh.
The horse and the rider were covered in the sea. And it's the story of what Miriam was talking about, was the deliverance of Israel when they were hemmed up against the sea, and Pharaoh's army. I mean, it was a situation like Dunkirk in World War II, the British Army. They were surrounded by Pharaoh's army, and the only thing that was keeping Pharaoh's army at bay was the pillar of fire, which was the Lord, and he positioned himself between Israel that was crushed up against the sea and Pharaoh's army that was pressing on them. And then once that they came through, God kills all the Pharaoh military guys, and then Miriam has a tambourine and she starts singing. The rider, the horse and the rider, covered by the sea. Mm-hmm. She starts singing this song, and so she was a prophetess as well.
Yeah.
Now she was not a judge like Deborah was many years later, but I'm just kind of tying together the idea of the prophet, the prophetess, and the song. And so, is there.
Yeah, I found a lot of them on her right here.
Okay.
On Miriam.
Okay. Number 3, how many of the judges of Israel were designated as prophet? And I just said so a few minutes ago. How many of the judges were designated as prophet?
2.
2. Who were they?
Samuel and Deborah.
Exactly, Samuel and Deborah. And I've kind of put a little commentary here. Let's talk about the word prophecy. Because a lot of times when we talk about prophecy, we have images of people who predict the future, right? You think, well, he's a prophet or she's a prophet because they predict the future. But Hebrew prophets primarily anticipated the punishment of evil or a better life on earth for faithful Israelites. And here I've got scriptural references of that, quite a few of them. Well, these weren't mine. I mean, I pulled this down from my program. A prophet or prophetess spoke the truth about the present and what would happen if people did not change their behavior and return to Yahweh's ways. So, a lot of times, especially us in our Western American culture, we use the word prophet to indicate, well, somebody's predicting the future. And that's really not the primary way that the Hebrews viewed prophecy. They viewed prophecy as if this person was God's mouthpiece, and they had a certain anointing on them to be able to speak the words of God, you know, and represent Him to the people. So that's why in the Jewish religion, who is the prophet of prophets in the Jewish religion? You know anything about it? Who's the big dog prophet to the Jews?
Moses.
Exactly. Moses. It's the law of Moses, 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 Moses. And even to this day, they don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah, the bulk of them. I mean, there's Messianic Jews and there's some Jews coming to the Lord, don't get me wrong, but by and large, they don't believe that Jesus was that Messianic prophet. Okay. So, um, so anyway, the idea of just what a prophecy is. Then in letter B, uh, on my commentary, it says, when Hebrew prophets did focus on the future, they usually were concerned with short-term future. For example, they predicted the fall of Israel or Judah or the end of the Babylonian or Assyrian empires, events that concerned events that ultimately fulfill God's intentions or righteousness. At times, prophecies also concerned events far into the future. For instance, Old Testament prophecies do not reference Jesus by name, but they do speak about what the future Messiah or the suffering servant would accomplish. The New Testament writers interpreted Old Testament texts as predictions of Jesus' birth, career, death, and resurrection. And they give some resources there. So, do you remember? Have you guys ever watched any of the motion picture series called The Chosen?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't watch it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not only that, but I mean, it's in the scriptures. So, one of the complaints that the Jewish religious leaders had at the time of Jesus was, and for us as Christians, this is a disconnect for us because we always we always say Jesus was born where? What town? The
Bethlehem.
little town of Bethlehem. Okay. And we take that as a historical fact. Okay. But Jesus grew up in the town of what? He was called a Nazarene.
Yeah, Nazareth.
Nazareth. So he grew up in Nazareth. But as we follow the story, the Christmas story, he was born in Bethlehem. Why was he born in Bethlehem instead of Nazareth? What was
Because they
going
didn't have nowhere for them to go.
Something wasn't
Yeah,
going on
story.
right then. Something wasn't because there was. I mean,
They're trying to hide
wasn't
it.
there something going on there?
There was something political going on. What was the political thing was,
They wanted to kill.
All the babies.
well, you had Herod wanting to do that, but the reason that Joseph and Mary were in Bethlehem is because everybody had to go back to their town, their hometown, to pay taxes. Remember that? They had to go to their hometown to pay taxes. So Joseph and Mary went back to Bethlehem because that's where Joseph was from. Okay. And because they had to pay taxes there, okay, to Caesar. And they were just there for a short period of time. That's what happened when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. But then, after he was born, stuff
Went
moved back to Nazareth because that's where Joseph's business was at.
how far are they apart?
Nazareth and Bethlehem, I'd have to look that up. Of course, you got to remember, put it in context. Israel at the time, and probably today, it's about the size of New Jersey. So, you know, probably, if I just guess right now, I'd say probably maybe Nazareth because Nazareth was up kind of the north side, maybe 30 miles or something like that. I could look it up on my stuff, but um, so it may have been, 2 or 3 day walk or something like that, or maybe longer. But so so the big problem that the some of the religious leaders had, because they had read prophecies in Isaiah and Zechariah and different Old Testament books that they'd read the prophecies that the Messiah was born in Bethlehem.
Mhm.
But see, and so their complaint was, look, this guy's from Nazareth. He's not from Bethlehem. But he was born in Bethlehem. They just didn't know it. Okay. Because they saw him being raised in Nazareth. Okay. The whole time. So he says, he's a Nazarene. He can't be the Messiah because the Messiah comes out of Bethlehem. Okay. And Bethlehem was considered the city of David. Okay. And David, all these prophecies about David having an eternal kingdom and the Messiah coming out of the lineage of David. Okay. So that's why those guys, those religious leaders at the time, were saying, he doesn't fit the bill. This is what the prophet said. Don't you know this guy's from Nazareth? He's not from Bethlehem. But he was from Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. Okay. So that is some of the background in terms of prophecy.
Well, I've read quite a few things on prophecy that shows that it is it does say on some of it does predict
Oh yeah, it does.
some that having a gift of prophecy means a person receives a message or insight from God. And there's so many different things about prophecy. How do you know you have a prophetic calling? Prophetic calling. You have decided to follow Jesus.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the meaning of the prophetic, and it's kind of got these definitions that have kind of this span, and it goes everywhere from what you're talking about. And in fact, this definition saying the same thing. It's where you're predicting the future. You know, now like if you read in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah is prophesying, and so Habakkuk also prophesied the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Well, at the time that Isaiah was prophesying that, it was about 120 years later that happened, or something like that. Okay. So he was prophesying, and Babylon at that time wasn't even a big world power. So a lot of people that heard Isaiah prophesy, they were going, you got no idea what you're talking about. That little backwater city, that little backwater city took over Assyria, which was the major dominant power at the time. And 120 years after Isaiah, there was Nebuchadnezzar tearing down the walls of the temple in Jerusalem. Exactly what Isaiah said. Okay. So that was a span of about 120 years. But you go back to the prophecy that like I was saying, with the spiritual rulers and leaders in Jesus' day, they were referring to the prophecy that the Messiah was going to be born in Bethlehem. Well, that prophecy was like about 700 years earlier. Okay. I think it was from Isaiah as well, or Zechariah, one of those guys. So you're talking about 600 or 700 years before that prophecy came true. Yeah. But
He says that in some of the scriptures that that's why this happened is because it refers back to the prophecy of the coming of the king and things like that.
But here's a New Testament prophecy that's even shorter. When remember when the disciples and they went to Jerusalem with Jesus, and they had never evidently, because they were up in Galilee, out in a rural area, okay, and when they came to Jerusalem, they saw this mighty temple of Herod. that Herod built. It was just something else. And how tall it was and all this stuff. And they were just marveling at that. And Jesus said, the day is coming when there's not going to be two stones of that setting on each other. In other words, it's going to be destroyed. So Jesus died somewhere around 30 or 33 AD. Okay, that's when he was crucified. In 70 AD, which is like less than 40 years later, the Romans came in, destroyed that entire temple to where there was no stone laid upon another stone. So there's an example of a New Testament prophecy that happened within one generation. And there's even other ones, like when Paul was traveling, and when he had determined that it was time for him to go to Rome and to bear up the testimony of Jesus before Caesar and all the political figures and all that kind of stuff. As he was traveling around to these cities that of these churches that he had founded, and a lot of them were in modern day Turkey, where modern day Turkey would be. It was called Asia Minor. As he was traveling around to these, it said prophets were prophesying, and they used um, um, visual aids. Like one of them put Paul's hands together and took a rope and wrapped it around his hands. And he said, if you go on this path, this is what's going to happen to you, you know, and you're going to get killed, you know. And that's exactly what happened to Paul. But to Paul's credit, he somehow knew that his time was up. He knew that it was time for him to go. And even though he had prophecies telling him, don't go, the people out of their emotion and love for him said, don't go, this is what's going to happen. They're going to kill you, blah, 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 you know. And Paul's saying, no, this is the word of the Lord, you know. Me to be bound up, me to suffer for the name of Christ, you know. So he kept going. But he was having these prophecies that took place just within months, you know. So um, the definitions of prophecies, I mean, they could be short term, they could be long term, but also a lot of the poetry and stuff, um, where you're speaking the words of the Lord, that uh, well, here's another example that comes to mind. Do you remember when Jesus was brought before Pilate? And you've been there. You've been before Pilate. Okay? And you were before Pilate. Well, referring to, we did this play, this cantata years ago. And Michael played the role of Jesus. Okay? And went before Pilate. And though in the play, we didn't cover this particular scene, but it's there in the Gospels that when he came before Caiaphas, so you had the Jewish political leaders and the temple leaders were wanting to kill Jesus, but they didn't have the authorization to do it themselves. That's why they kept prodding the Romans to kill him. Okay. But Caiaphas, it says, Caiaphas starts prophesying at the time about Jesus being the Son of God, the Lamb of God. Okay. Now, this is a guy who hated Jesus. He wanted to kill him because Jesus was upsetting the apple cart of their power structure, because the religious leaders in Jerusalem were ruling the roost over all the people. They had the power, the money, all that kind of stuff. And he was prophesying about Jesus, true prophecy. Okay. But yet he didn't know what he was saying, you know. I could find the scriptures for you if you don't believe me, but
That
that
is
is happening.
that's crazy.
It is crazy, but and there's a similar thing in the Old Testament.
So you don't even necessarily have to be.
you don't have to be holy.
You have to be holy. You don't have to be a believer. You don't have to be. Wow.
Well, here's another example, Michael. You guys ever heard the guy Balaam? Balaam was an Old Testament prophet, but he wasn't necessarily a prophet of Yahweh. Okay. The story of Balaam was, I think it was the king of Moab. As the Israelites were leaving Egypt and they were coming up through Moab and stuff and heading their way to the promised land, he did not want them coming through his kingdom. So he tries to hire Balaam to come and curse Israel. And the Lord came to Balaam, who was not even a prophet of Yahweh. He comes to him and says, you're not supposed to go with these guys, these guys in Moab. Well, he ultimately goes with them. And remember the story about the donkey? He was riding his donkey. He was a faithful donkey. And he's on his way to Moab. And all of a sudden, the donkey stops. And the donkey, he's whipping the donkey and saying, "Come on, you stupid ass." Come on. And the donkey won't go. And the donkey turned around and spoke to him.
Yeah.
Why are you whipping me? Have I not been faithful to you? And the donkey was banging him up against these stone walls and hurting his leg and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and there was this giant angel of the Lord standing in front of him with a sword drawn. And the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, if she hadn't turned to the side, you'd be a dead man right now. Okay. And so Balaam went ahead, and the angel of the Lord let him go ahead and go to Moab. I think it was Moab. Was it Moab or Midian? Or anyway, one of those. And the king who had purchased was paying him to come and curse Israel. And so Balaam says, well, let me go check it out. By this time, he's going to check it out with Yahweh somehow or another. I don't know how he was going to do that, but he did. Went off to the side. And Yahweh says, you can only say what the words I put in your mouth. That's it. So he goes, and I think the Balak was the name of the king. He said, okay, we're up on this mountain. I'm going to curse all those Israelites because we're getting ready to go to battle with them, cursing them. Well, he ends up blessing them instead of cursing them. He could only bless them because of the words that God put in his mouth. Okay? That happened like 7 times. And Balak was so angry, that he wanted to kill him, but he couldn't kill him. And so you get these kind of stories you're reading from both Old Testament and New Testament. You got a donkey speaking the word of the Lord. Okay, so you don't even have to be a human to prophesy.
Hey, man.
Wow.
So it kind of changes our perspective as to what a prophet is. Yes, there are guys that have been, and women that have been called to be prophets, and over a period of time, like Deborah was, like Moses was.
There's over 300 prophecies from the Old Testament. Some scholars suggest the number could be as high as 400.
Uh-huh.
Jesus is believed to have fulfilled.
Jesus, has fulfilled, yeah. Okay. All right.
And there's a lot of prophecies.
Okay. So nothing be riffing on that. All right. So let's. I got a few minutes left. Okay. I'm gonna turn these maps around for you. All right. Deborah and Barak in their army. Mustered their army. So we are down to where did it say that Deborah was from? Well, when we look in verse 4 and 5 of chapter 2. I'm sorry, chapter 4. It says, she sat under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. So on the map, find Ramah and Bethel on this map. There. That's right, down here. And this is actually the central part of the land. This was the north part of the land up here. This is the Sea of Galilee that we heard so much of. A lot of Jesus, Nazareth was up in here, and a lot of Jesus's life was spent down here, up here, whereas Bethlehem was down here. Okay. And then he was up around, Nazareth was up here in the northern part. So she was down here, and here's your legend of 20 miles. It's about that length right there. So you can kind of estimate. Okay. So where was Barak living according to this? He was out of a place called Kadesh Naphtali. Naphtali. So where was that at?
No.
Like yeah, it's easier seeing this now. So he was from Kadesh Naphtali, right here on the sand, the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So it's not showing this map, but
right here.
Yeah, right there. It would have been right in there. Okay, and she was way down here, and then she summons him.
That's a good.
I think I looked it up, Michael. I think it's about 80 miles.
That's a good little hike.
About 80 miles.
Walking.
Yeah.
Yeah, walking. That's
like 4 good days, probably 3 or 4.
Yeah, I don't think I can walk 8 miles in 4 days.
No, well,
I'm talking about 4 or 5 miles a day. I mean, yeah, walk
80 miles.
80 miles in 4 days.
That'd be 20 miles a day.
I mean, you're gonna have to walk 20 miles a day.
So, 20 miles a day would be, if it takes me, even walking Gus,
20.
About an hour to go 2 miles. So maybe you would go hour to go 2 miles. Maybe you go 10 miles a day, or you could go 20 if you got a full day.
Yeah, you could go 20.
You gotta be intentional about it.
Yeah,
right. You can't be messing around. Ain't no walking in the park. That's at least. That's days.
Yeah, it's
that is days. I mean,
so she gets a word to the guy and said, "Look, you got to come down here and visit with me."
Now that I can look at it and put my, it was there and that was there.
Yeah.
I don't see how back in them days, how an army would go trekking like all this way and then have to fight after they went all that way. Yeah, that didn't make no sense.
No, it doesn't.
How would she get word to him?
Oh, I'm sure that she sent a
carrier,
a journey, somebody.
Somebody on a horse.
Well, I doubt that not many people had horses. It might have been somebody on a horse or a donkey.
I mean, was
or
this?
something, but still.
I guess was it somebody's job?
Well, she was the prophetess for all of Israel. So, I mean, she carried some authority and she probably would have said, okay, get somebody to go up and tell this dude I want to see, you know. So I mean they were mobile, you know, and whether that meant somebody was going to be
Walking that far.
walking that far or, you know,
Sure.
but even back if you watch some of the even World War One movies, you would have these couriers carrying messages in these little pouches and stuff and running, you know, through the trenches and all that stuff to get from one place to another to get a word to this commander and so forth. So that you've got people that are couriers, and you look at the native Indians of this country, and they would that's how they would correspond too. And you'd have before they had horses and stuff, they would run huge long distances to take, you know, that kind of stuff. So they have their ways of getting it out. So Barack was living, and I already said the body of water that he was living next to, and that was the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee must ring a bell to you when we're talking about New Testament. What was so important about the Sea of Galilee in the New Testament?
Where he walked on water, wasn't it?
Yeah, he walked on water. That's where he found Peter, James, John.
Yeah.
They were fishermen there on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. This was Jesus' stomping grounds.
That's where it was.
Yeah,
right?
that's where he spent most of his time. He would journey to Jerusalem a couple times, but for these big major feasts like Passover or something. But basically, most of his ministry was right up here, and even over in here, he'd come over across the Jordan and he ministered over here too. Remember the demoniac of the Gadarenes that had like a legion full of demons? Well, he was on this side of the Jordan, okay, across the Sea of Galilee, which the Sea of Galilee really is a lake. It's just a big lake. It's a freshwater lake. And so Jesus came over here in a boat and met the demoniac here, and he freed him from all those demons. And all those demons went on all those pigs.
Yeah.
And went over the
The
cliff.
pigs went over the cliff.
Right. So, see, he was not dealing with Israelites over here because Israelites will not eat pork. Okay. Pork, pigs, pig meat, all that is considered unclean. It's not culture.
What are they? Kosher. Yeah, kosher. Everything has to be kosher.
So he wasn't, this guy over here, the demoniac of Gadarenes, was a Gentile. He wasn't even a Jew. And then Jesus frees him of, you know, they say a legion is 100
10,000
or whatever.
A legion was like a lot.
It was like a lot. Freedom of all those demons. They went into the herd of pigs, and they probably ran into the Sea of Galilee off of the cliff. But anyway, so we know the Sea of Galilee and so much activity of Jesus' ministry and stuff was all up here in this part of the Israelite territories. And she was down here, and Jerusalem is down right in here. You don't see it, but it's on that map, but it's right down there on the edge of Ephraim and Benjamin, right in there. So, let's see. Okay, here I've got it on number 6 on the bottom of the page. The prophet has summoned Barak to make it's a 65-mile journey to meet her. Okay, and we already talked about what the reason was that she called him. He knew he was supposed to do before he came to see her. We talked about delivering it in his hand. Let's see, Lord told him what to do. Okay. Okay. Before we leave this section, and of course we're talking about verses 4 to 10. And verse 4 to 10, Deborah, Barak was to assemble 10,000 men. Deborah prophesied that two things would happen if she went with Barak. So that's the other thing we sort of missed. If you back up for just a second on 8, when she told Barak, look, you gotta go to war. And Barak said to her, the only way I'm gonna go is if you go with me, then I'll go. But if you don't go with me, I'm not going. And it reminded me, and we won't look at it, I think I've referenced on here. In Exodus, Moses said the same thing to God. Remember, God was getting tired of putting up with Israel in the wilderness, of their wanting to go back to Egypt, they were wanting to kill Moses and all this stuff. And God was getting fed up with them. And he finally told Moses, okay, you go ahead and take these people to the promised land to fulfill the promise, but I'm not going with you. And Moses said something very similar to what Barak said to Deborah. He said, Moses said to the Lord, said, if you don't go with me, I'm not going nowhere. And you guys sing a song like, or you used to sing a song like that. You go with Nehemiah. If you don't go with me, I won't go, or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
You know what? I'm ringing a bell.
Yeah.
That's where that came from. Moses saying, I'm not going to go if you're not going to go, because your presence is that important to me. And she said, okay, I'm going to go with you. This is verse 9. But the journey that you're going to be taking shall not be for your honor, for the Lord will give Sisera over to the hand of a woman. So she told Barak, once again, she was prophesying. Okay, I'll go with you. But she just prophesied to him two things there. What did she say?
You won't get the credit.
You're not going to get the credit.
Not leap you forward.
Yeah. And I'm going to give Sisera over to the hand of a woman. Was she ever talking about how that she was going to be that woman?
Deborah rose and went.
No, she wasn't.
No, I don't think
Deborah wasn't talking about herself.
No, I don't think she was talking about herself. No.
We'll find out a little bit later on. I'm sure you read it in preparation for this a couple of weeks ago, but
Yeah,
she wasn't talking. She's talking about ultimately. She's talking about another lady by the name of JL.
yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So that takes us down through verse 10. Next week we'll pick up on verse 11. Maybe finish chapter. Went a little long tonight, so sorry. So, any final comments or revelations about what we talked about?
I like the fact that you kind of identify with what we got going on with the ministry. That's kind of good. You know, that we're studying something that we can relate to in life terms right now. That seems what's been going on really with this fellowship and studying the word, is that we do find things that are in common with what we're reading. You know what I mean? So the instances.
Yeah, it's very, yeah, it's like life. It's like bringing that to the present.
Yeah. Same, similar circumstances.
And not just addiction, but I just think everything.
It is.
Yeah, it's not. The
It's,
addiction is not even the reason.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a spiritual malady.
Yeah, it's just
It's a disconnection from the source.
free will.
That's it.
Decision making.
Yep.
Dying to yourself.
Amen. Stay out of yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I was telling them they're all bound up inside themselves. You gotta get out of there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all are to an extent. That the battle, it's all the time.
Yeah, it's a process. What I was teaching is to process things out of you. Get the evil out. Speak it with your tongue and get it out of somebody. Because if you don't get it out of here, it stays and festers in you.
Yeah.
So it's best to find somebody that you can share things that are going on with, because you can read. I can read people, and I can tell when one of my guys is going through something, and I can say, I pull it out of, try to get them to give him, tell me, give you what's going on with you, because you're acting some kind of way. You know, there's something going on, and they'll spill it out, and they feel better instantly because they didn't let it reside in them.
Yeah.
And we do a process. This is our process group.
Yeah.
You know? So it's really, really important to have someone that can call you out on your BS. Because if not, you would just sit there and fester and think about it all the time.
Yeah. And it just gets bigger in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Even
It's
though,
very real. It's very real.
very good. Good discussion, guys. Michael, you want to lead us in prayer, cleaning?
Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for each other. Thank you for your mighty word. Thank you for uh, just just picking apart your word on our level uh, for me, Father. It's giving me new perspective. And Father, I know you can use anything, anyone, just anyhow. You will get your word out, Father. And I thank you for the rain and yes, and I thank you for these men, Father. Uh, you know, I thank you for Mike. I thank you for giving him to me, Father. I really appreciate that, Father. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Deal. I'm going to shut the recording off. Hey, Bucky. Missed ya. Hope you watch this.
God bless. Well,